Dr. Pagie Beeson is the Department Head of Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences at the University of Arizona. Her research focuses on the cognitive processes behind language, as well as the development and treatment of language disorders. Today we discussed language disorders that affect reading and writing.
I am a speech-language pathologist. I got my bachelor's and master's degrees at the University of Kansas and then came here for my PhD. And I really didn't anticipate that I was going to have an opportunity to stay here, but after I got my PhD, we got a very large center grant at the Center for Neurogenic Communication Disorders, and I was a research scientist and then became tenure track faculty, and now I'm department head. So I've been here a long time, but my area of study is acquired communication disorders in adults. So with a specific emphasis on the neurologically related disorders. Aphasia is my focus area, which is acquired language impairment. So my research involves both imaging to understand where the damage is, some functional imaging to look at the neural substrates that support language, written language in particular, and then a large focus on rehabilitation. So the development and testing of protocols to help people recover from acquired language impairment. So it's kind of that blend of cognitive science, neuroscience, speech, language.
So you focus on reading and writing. So how can aphasias impair those functions?
Yeah. Well, language is language. So there's the spoken expression, which of course develops first.
Sure.
Written language skills develop on top of, and they're interesting because you have to be taught how to read and write, whereas spoken language you really can do that within the environment. But it is language, and so the core cognitive skills that support spoken language also support written language. So it's not the case that you get aphasia and you only have trouble talking and you're fine with writing. If you have an impairment in spoken language, you are going to have an impairment in written language. Now, sometimes the writing can be a bit better, and so that's important because you can take advantage of that. But quite often, actually, writing can be one of the more stubborn, residual problems. Because I'll have people who've recovered fairly well in their spoken language, and they still have a lot of difficulty constructing sentences, with good grammatical form. And so, again, it's not because there's something distinct about writing. It's that there are additional demands when you're doing written language. So sometimes you'll see the deficit in the writing when you don't see it as much in the spoken language.
So you mentioned that spoken language is kind of acquired through someone's experience with the environment, but writing has to be taught. So what differences do you see in the brain when learning to write as opposed to learning to speak a language?
Well, writing involves, and reading, because really we can think of those as, having the same foundation.
Sure.
Then you're relying on the visual representation. Okay, so learning about the world, of course, it does involve things that you see in the world, the conceptual knowledge, what's the sound that goes with that, what's the word that goes with that. When you get into a writing system, you also need to learn about the orthography and what are the correspondences between sounds and letters. And so you need this connectivity from the visual representation to the language area. And it can be at that, what we call sublexical level, like just literally sounds to letters, but also whole word, that letter combination is that word. And it does depend on the language because, like with English, we have both irregular words and regular words where the sound letter correspondence is predictable.
Right.
In Spanish is more transparent, where the sound letter correspondences are stronger than English. French is one where they're not, that strong. Yeah. So, so the language influences how much reliance you can have just straight on the sound letter systems. But as we become literate, we actually learn both. You learn the familiar orthographic strings that, oh yeah, that's APPLA, that's Apple. But you don't even think about it as APPLA. Right. That's Apple, right? Because those strings become familiar. But in an abstract way, because they could be written all different kinds of ways. So you get these abstract representations. But you also do know the correspondences between the sounds and the letters. And when the brain damage disrupts that, it makes reading and writing very hard. Because you're just, you no longer have that strong support from the phonology that you would in a typical literate system. So.
What are some of the major issues that come up when you're trying to help someone recover language that they've lost?
I'll go back to the reading versus writing. We know now, because of neuroimaging, that the critical region that supports the written language system for writing and for reading is, in fact, in the same area. But 20 years ago, that wasn't entirely clear.
Yeah.
And because sometimes you get people who just have a reading problem, and sometimes you get people that just have a writing problem, that, there was sort of this pulling apart of, oh, well, this must be the neural substrate for reading, and this must be the neural substrate for writing. But actually, at the fundamental core level of this orthographic knowledge, it is shared. Okay. What I think distracted scientists over time in terms of trying to discern that is you can have some problems that are more on the input side. And so I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but some people get alexia, so acquired reading impairment, without a writing problem, without agraphia. So it's called alexia without agraphia. And that's a very interesting phenomenon. And I have patients like that. And you see that, and you think, well, then these must be two very distinct things. But if you study it a bit more, someone that has alexia without agraphia, if you spell the words out loud to them, they know.
So just to get this clear, the person would not be able to recognize the word apple if it was just put in front of them. Mm-hmm. But if the letters individually were read out to them,
and they can even read it.
Or they can read them.
That's right. So they can go A-P-E-L. Oh, apple.
Do they have to read it out loud?
Good question. They do not. They tend to, particularly early on,
right.
Because it's just natural. Weird thing.
Yeah.
And part of the rehabilitation is actually to try to move away from that approach and get better at the whole word reading, because as you can imagine, it's slow. And you get a word length effect, so a longer word takes longer than a short word.
Sure.
And for you and I, we don't really have a word length effect for how quickly you apprehend what a word is. And so that's actually part of the process in terms of rehabilitation that's a good compensatory strategy, but actually in rehabilitation we can move away from it and get them better at recognizing the word as a whole.
Oh, interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it is interesting. Yeah, I mean, I remember one of my first patients that had this syndrome, and he was telling me about it. And he said, my wife called me. No. Someone called me and left a message, and I wrote the message for my wife. Okay, so he's on the phone. He writes the message, and then she came home. Or no, she called, and he wanted to read the message to her, and he couldn't read. Just like, I wrote it, and I can't read it. It's like classic.
Wow.
So, of course, he thought it was his eyes. So he went to the eye doctor. But it wasn't his eyes, it was his brain.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So you mentioned he was one of your patients. So were you practicing?
As a speech pathologist? Yes. So, well, actually, he was one of our research participants.
Okay.
But I did practice before I came back from my PhD. I practiced as a speech language pathologist. And then, again, because my research is related to the treatment, we are doing treatment. I have a team, and actually have a full-time research speech language pathologist. So we work together on the approach, but but she does a lot more of the service delivery, the clinical delivery than I do now. But you never forget the things that patients teach you,
Oh,